Good morning, everyone. I'm Kurt Menke, and I'm going to talk to you about QGIS for hydrological applications, and then I'm going to tie that into QGIS and education. I work with Bird's Eye View, which is my own GIS consulting business, and I'm sorry that I had to pre-record this, but I'm right there with you drinking some little coffee on Saturday morning out of my QGIS mug here. Again, my business is Bird's Eye View, and I am at birdseyeviewgis.com. I also have another venture called the Q Cooperative, which is an effort between myself and several of the QGIS developers in Spain and France and Portugal to provide QGIS support services, especially in North America, where there is kind of a gap in that service these days. So our URL is qcooperative.net. So check it out if you're interested. I'm based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and wherever I go, the TV show Breaking Bad seems to put us on the map. So if you're familiar with that, that was shot in my town. And I provide just general services. I do a little bit of everything, mostly spatial analysis and cartography. But increasingly, I find myself being asked to do training. Seems like QGIS training is very hot these days. I'm a QGIS certified trainer, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that program at the end of the talk. The reason I can't be with you live is that I have had a really busy year teaching QGIS workshops. And I had a workshop in American Samoa that I thought was going to be scheduled early in 2020, but they really needed to have it done in November. So right now, I am down here in American Samoa. Well, actually, right now, I'm in my office in Albuquerque on Saturday morning recording this, but when you're hearing it, that's where I'll be, is in American Samoa, teaching a 3-day QGIS course to some people at the Department of Health in American Samoa. You may know me from some QGIS books. I've written several QGIS books over the last several years, and one of the books is what I want to talk about first this morning, is called QGIS for Hydrological Applications. And this was just published in September, so it's a brand new book. I wrote this with Hans van der Kwast, who's a Dutch hydrologist who works at IHE Delft in the Netherlands. And Hans and I have known each other for several years. We met at a QGIS conference in Denmark several years ago, and we were both at the QGIS conference in March in A Coruña, Spain. And this is where we hatched the idea for this book. Hans had developed this, what's in the book, as a curriculum that he teaches at his school. And he has had this as an open curriculum for several years. And he thought it would be nice to publish this as an actual workbook so it could be used more widely. So we approached Gary Sherman at Locate Press and floated the idea by him, and he thought it was great. So we worked over this mostly over the summer. We got it done in about 3 months. And now I want to kind of introduce it to you and just kind of show you what's in there. This is a picture from September in the Netherlands, where we had our book launch, and we also donated a couple books to the library there. And that week we also test drove the book with a class at IHE Delft with about 50 students from 20 different countries, and we went through the whole book in a 40-hour week, and it worked quite well. So I'm excited to share it with you. This is the blurb on the Locate Press webpage for the book. So the workbook is designed to introduce professionals in the water sector to the state-of-the-art functionality that we have in QGIS 3X these days. But it can also be used as a beginner course for introducing GIS concepts and workflows to people just starting out learning QGIS. For example, the beginning of the book shows a geo referencing workflow where you take a topographic map, georeference it to real-world coordinates, and then learn how to digitize points, lines, and polygons off of that. So you get introduced to digitizing functionality. And at the end of every chapter, we show you how to take the data that you've produced and do some nice styling in QGIS to make a nice map. So here, for example, you learn how to label the peaks with a nice SVG icon and use things like label halos around them to help make the labels more readable against the busy background. You learn how to use an inverted or a shape burst fill. It's not inverted, but a shape burst fill to give a nicer style to the lake. So you learn right from the beginning of the book some nice cartographic techniques as well. There's a section on mapping coordinate points, and this involves some meteorological stations in the Netherlands. So first you're shown how to take that data out of a spreadsheet and bring it into QGIS and generate points from the coordinates in that spreadsheet. There's also some temperature data associated with those stations. You're shown how to do a join to attach the temperatures to the points. And finally, there's a discussion on interpolation, and you run through a couple different interpolation techniques. IDW, which is inverse distance weighting on the left, and nearest neighbor interpolation on the right. And you can then, as a student going through the book, compare the results of those two interpolation techniques and decide which one gives you the better result. The heart of the book is stream and catchment delineation, and the book uses open data throughout. So at the very beginning, you use the SRTM downloader to begin downloading some DEMs. So you download DEM tiles. You mosaic those together. You learn how to reproject those and clip them to your study area. There's a discussion of interpolating voids, but it's not necessary in the example. But you do learn how to fill sinks in that DEM so that you can calculate a nice flow direction map, derive streams, and define the outflow point. The final piece is deriving a catchment, which is British English for a watershed. So you learn how to derive a watershed and then finally convert the final model outputs to data that you can use. For the fill sinks component, that's when water gets trapped in a pit. So on the right, you're seeing elevation values, and there's a lower number in the middle that would trap the water and prevent stream creation. So this is a common problem with DEMs, and we use the Saga tool, fill sinks. There's a couple different ones. We use the Wang and Liu fill sink algorithm in the book to create a DEM that can be used for the rest of the analysis. When you're filling sinks, you can do it two different ways. Here you can see a flow down through some elevation pixels here. This would be a sink right here where water would get trapped there. You can either choose to take the average of those pixels and fill that up, or cut through to remove that sink. The next step is to derive streams, and we show you two different methodologies, flow accumulation and Strahler order. So the Strahler order is a technique developed by a hydrologist named Strahler, and you start out with two of the smallest tributaries, which would be a Strahler order 1. Where those two order 1 streams converge, it turns into a Strahler order 2 stream. Where two Strahler order 2 streams converge, that results in a Strahler order 3. If a lower order hits a higher order, it stays a Strahler order 3 in this situation, where the 1 meets a 3. But then where the two 3s converge, it results in a Strahler order 4. So that's the idea behind Strahler orders, and the resulting output also gives you nice data that you can use to style streams in a more intuitive way that taper to tips at the lower Strahler orders. So in QGIS, this is what the output of that Strahler order algorithm looks like. Here, the paletted unique values renderer is being used and a blue color ramp, and you're seeing the Strahler orders from 10 to 1. And one of the things you have to do when you're doing this kind of hydrological analysis is do some sensitivity training. So you need to deduce which of the Strahler orders represents real streams in the real world. So in other words, what's the threshold below which they aren't actually streams in the real world. And so we show how we can use the Quick Map Services plugin and the OpenStreetMap base map to look where streams are on the landscape and see which Strahler orders are lining up with those to set a threshold that will be used in other algorithms going forward. The next tool that we show you how to use is another Saga tool, Channels, Network, and Drainage Basins. And this tool can be used with the D8 method, where you're using 8 surrounding pixels to determine flow direction. There's also a D infinite method. Usually you get better results with D8. It's more reliable, so that's what gets covered more thoroughly in the book. There's also a section on doing spatial analysis with Map Algebra. So in this scenario, the scenario you're given, you're looking to identify suitable wells, and you're given information that the well should be within 150 meters of houses or roads, have no industry, mines, or landfills within 300 meters, and a depth parameter. The well should be less than 40 meters deep. So you're given some input data for each of these parameters, and you go through a workflow to identify the wells that meet all those criteria using the raster calculator. And then at the end, again, you're shown how to nicely style the output so that you have a nice intuitive result to show people. Another example of some of the cartography in the book is developing circular color ramps for flow direction rasters. So a flow direction raster is very similar in a lot of ways to Aspect, where it's telling you which direction streams are flowing down a slope. And in that case, 360 and 1 are both north. So you really need to develop a color ramp that's circular, where north at both ends is the same color. And so here we show you how to use the color ramp editor to develop one of those circular color ramps so that you can intuitively style the output. So this is really stressed throughout the book. And this is actually the reason I'm talking about this more, because that's the part of the book I worked on the most. This is the final map that gets produced in the book. And we show you lots of nice tricks for creating nice cartographic maps in the print composer. So this one, for example, has a locator map that you use map themes to produce. The study area is being accented with an inverse polygon shape burst fill. You learn how to use expressions to create an automatic date that gets updated whenever you open the project, and use a variable for your name as cartographer. You learn how to use blending mode. So all the towns on this map were pulled from OpenStreetMap, and we're using a nice technique with label halos in here and blending modes, which help the halo be effective without getting too much visual emphasis on the map. And the elevation is being depicted on the map with a gradient legend. So now I want to switch gears. I was asked by the organizing committee to talk briefly about a series of blogs that I've just published this fall called Esri and Me. It's a 4-part series where I go through my origin story with FOSS4G, how my relationship with Esri has affected my community, conservation. I do a lot of work in ecological conservation and have for quite a while. So there's a story there. And finally, education to wrap this all up. And this whole blog series was really inspired by this tweet that I did a few years ago at this Society for Conservation GIS conference, which was an open conference, but hosted or largely sponsored by Esri. So it was funny because all the posters were made by and printed by Esri, but I was teaching an intro to QGIS class. So the irony was obvious, and I tweeted this out, and I'll tell you a little bit about that as we go forward. So my FOSS4G origin story. So I've been doing GIS for a long time, since the late 90s. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of open source GIS available. So I learned on Unix workstations using ArcInfo 7 and eventually ArcView 3X, writing Avenue scripts and AML scripts to get things done. And in 2001, I was working a lot with web mapping applications, and I was using ArcIMS and Map Objects IMS and having all kinds of problems with those, and discovered Map Server and a really early version of PostGIS. It was an early version of Map Server as well. And these were really time consuming at the time to get installed, but once I got these installed on the server and rebuilt the map applications with them, they were faster, more stable. I mean, they were so stable that you wouldn't even have to check on them for a year at a time. They just ran and ran and ran. And I was sold on open source at that point. And that took me to the first Map Server user meeting in 2003. So this is the picture of that meeting, which is really a precursor of all the FOSS4Gs that we have now. So there were about 100, 125 people there, and there's a much younger version of me pictured in the back there. And it was an exciting time to get involved because it felt very new and subversive to me, the open source technology. A few years later, I had my first encounter with QGIS. In 2004, I downloaded QGIS, which was at version 0.7 CMIS. And if you haven't seen it, this is what CMIS looked like, or what QGIS looked like at that time. And so it's come a long way since then. It's amazing what QGIS has evolved into. Another thing that came up when I was putting this blog together was a story about a conference coup that Esri orchestrated in my community a few years back. There used to be this organization called the Southwest User Group, and it was a grassroots conference that would travel amongst 5 southwestern U.S. states. It would go from New Mexico to Colorado to Wyoming to Utah to Arizona and back again. And each time it would go to one of these states, it was held by the local community on a volunteer basis. And the conference was started in New Mexico, where I live, and had a clear mandate to be an open conference, even though we realized that 90% of the people would be using Esri software. And this is one of the programs that we put together when I was co-chair of this conference in 2007, where it was on Halloween, so we had a nice Halloween-styled logo for the conference, and it was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And 5 years later, it came back around to us in 2012, and Esri had started trying to insert themselves into this SWUG organization, which again was all volunteer. And in 2012, they asked if they could have a seat on our organizing committee, and we told them that vendors were not allowed, but they could sponsor if they would like to. They declined and instead organized a competing conference for the same week, an hour away, just up the road. Our meeting was going to be in Albuquerque, and theirs was going to be in Santa Fe, and they're 2 neighboring towns. And so to make a long story short, they killed our conference. Their conference pulled enough attendance away from us that we couldn't pass enough seed money on to the next state to organize the next one. They set up a domain and were really aggressive about it, and completely took over the conference, made it an Esri SWUG, rebranded it Esri SWUG, and it now pretty much no longer exists. And this had been a conference that had been operating as an open conference for 25 years. It was a really painful experience. And so for me, the message is that we really have to be diligent in our communities to keep things open and inclusive of everyone. And this was a cautionary tale for me. Another blog entry involved conservation. So I mentioned I do a lot of ecological conservation work, and I've been part of this organization called the Society for Conservation GIS for a long time. And this is an organization that's independent. They're a nonprofit, but they are heavily sponsored by Esri. And when I tweeted that picture of a few slides back of me teaching a QGIS class with an Esri poster, one of the Esri sponsors who was getting ready to sign the memorandum of understanding to provide support to SCGIS for another 5 years, balked at that and said, "Why are we supporting this organization?" And I had to talk everyone down, and fortunately the MOU got signed. Board started inviting me to teach more QGIS workshops. And so the last 3 years I've gone there to teach QGIS workshops. And it's a heavily Esri influenced organization. In fact, conservation in the US in general is Esri oriented because all the nonprofits are given free or close to free licenses by Esri. So to go there teaching QGIS is me walking into a bunch of Esri users trying to share this technology with them. And the people in my workshops really appreciate it. The workshops always go really well and people are excited about it. But walking around the conference, I get a lot of nasty looks and rude comments. And I started feeling this last year, really uncomfortable. I started getting, heckled and things like that in talks I was given. And so again, it always amazes me. I don't know what the take-home point is here, but it takes a champion to really convert a community or an organization to start using FOSS4G in some way. And I've always experienced that. As soon as I've left organizations, they've reverted back to Esri after I've left many times. So it really, it takes a lot of hard work for some reason in the United States to keep organizations using open source. And this takes me to education. In the US, almost all the colleges and universities are teaching GIS via Esri without any other software. And I see this as an ethical issue because if students want to do what I do and be a consultant or continue their studies after they graduate, once they lose their geography department Esri license, they're out of luck and they don't know of any alternatives. And so one of my real focus areas is trying to get universities to offer more than Esri, teach some classes with QGIS or PostGIS or R or GRASS. And I think this is one of the keys to really getting broader FOSS4D adoption in the world is getting students aware of it as they're going through school. And I think it's fine to teach Esri as well, but I think people should be teaching more than one tool to do this kind of work. So my contribution to this so far has been writing books, and this book I came out with this spring to me is really a resource that educators can use. It could be used for independent study by people as well, but this is a 400-page workbook that has 32 lab exercises in it. And so my idea is that professors can use this because I know professors don't have a lot of time to learn QGIS or develop a new curriculum. So I wrote this so that they could use it all or in part to start weaving QGIS into their curriculums in geography departments and other departments teaching GIS. And this is another book published through Locate Press. So again, my idea is kind of like, if I build it, they will come. And I had this idea this spring when it got published to get these postcards printed out and to mail them to professors. And so I spent weeks looking up the 2 top universities teaching geography or geospatial in all 50 US states. And I would send all the professors in that department one of these postcards. So I sent out 400 different cards this spring. And I advertised this on Twitter and got several international folks interested. And I sent postcards to about a dozen other countries. So if you know any professors who could benefit by using this book to start teaching QGIS in their curriculum, let me know and I'll be happy to send them a card. Since this isn't an interactive presentation, the conference organizers asked me to talk a little bit about what I thought FOSS4G was what the status was in Latin America and in the US. In the US, we have a QGIS user group, for example, and we have an OSGeo chapter as well, but there's very little participation. Most of in the QGIS group, there's about 4 or 5 of us who are active. And OSGeo, again, it's 6 or 8 people in the US chapter who are active. But I know that there are, thousands of users out there, but they're kind of hidden. And when I look at Latin America and the QGIS user groups, it looks like things are going fairly well down there. There's national user groups in Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Peru. So I think that's fantastic. When you have a national user group, you also get a vote in QGIS elections. So that's a nice perk as well. And another thing I was asked was what I thought, if I had any suggestions for QGIS Mexico. And one thing I wanted to talk about from that standpoint is QGIS certification. So this is a program that's only been around for a year and a half or so. And what it is if you are a QGIS certified organization, when you teach a course, you can give your students an official QGIS certificate. And this can be used for professional workshops to full semester courses and anything in between. And the program itself has two main goals. One is to get more community involvement in the QGIS project. So when you apply to this program, to one of the ways you get approved as a QGIS certifying organization is to document all your contributions to the QGIS project. So only people who have contributed to the project in some way can get approved. The other is to vet your educational materials. So we ask for a sample of lessons and data and lectures to make sure that QGIS as a project is being represented accurately and that things are up to date. It's also a nice revenue stream for the QGIS project. Every certificate that gets issued results in a €20 donation to QGIS.org. And so for myself as a consultant, when I teach a professional workshop, I wrap this €20 cost into my consulting fee. And it's a little harder for me to get the local universities I teach with to offer these, but I do have my local continuing education department now allowing me to offer QGIS certificates as well. So I think it would be great if more universities and people who are teaching QGIS workshops in Latin America would apply to be QGIS certified organizations. So if you're interested in that, this is the URL that you can use to sign up. You simply fill in your name, your email, your web address, and you will be contacted by one of us who are previewing these applications, and you'll be asked to provide a sample of your teaching material and also all your contributions to the project. Another thing that is asked for is basically to make sure you have good standing in your local QGIS community. And the QGIS Project Steering Committee makes the final determination on whether you are a QGIS certified organization or not. So how's it going? Well, there are currently, I think it's actually a little larger. I think it's 24 certifying organizations in the world at the moment. In 2018, there were 214 certificates issued, which resulted in over €4,000 in revenue for the QGIS project. In 2019, there have been 100, actually this is dated. This is from a slide I gave in March. I actually haven't gotten updated data. I'm fairly certain that in 2019, the revenue is over €5,000 at this point. So the program is going pretty well. And I think this would be a great way for people teaching QGIS in Latin America to get more involved with the project and provide a revenue stream, and also provide your students with official QGIS certificates. That can be a nice perk for them. So that's the end of my talk. I really would love to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to talk to you. It's a real honor to be invited. I wish I could have given a live talk, but if you have questions for me, this is my contact information. Feel free to email me or ping me on Twitter and ask me about anything that I've gone over. And I hope you have a great conference. Thank you.